Hey, I'm really glad you're here. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
My parents' house looked like a wedding catalog exploded inside it. Every table in the living room had white flowers, real ones, not the cheap grocery store kind. The kind that come in refrigerated trucks and cost more than my first car. Brooke was standing in the center of the room like she owned the place. Technically, she didn't. My parents did. But tonight, no one was correcting her. She had a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other. Every few minutes, she showed someone another photo of the wedding venue. "Look at this ballroom," she said, zooming in on the screen. "Crystal chandeliers, Italian marble floor. We're spending almost $150,000 on the wedding alone." Someone whistled. Another guest said, "That's incredible." Brooke smiled the way people smile when compliments land exactly where they expected. "And Julian's unit is flying in 2 officers from DC," she added. "Apparently he's becoming a very important person." Across the room, Julian lifted his drink slightly like a man acknowledging applause. Captain Julian Hayes, United States Army. He wore that title like it was part of his name. I sat in the corner of the room on a leather chair that cost more than my entire apartment rent for a year. My outfit didn't match the rest of the room. Everyone else wore suits or cocktail dresses. I wore a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. My mother noticed earlier. She didn't say anything out loud, but she looked at me the same way someone looks at a stain on a white tablecloth. Julian eventually wandered over. He had that relaxed confidence some officers develop early, the kind that works great in a uniform and turns into arrogance everywhere else. He stopped in front of me and tilted his head slightly. "So you're Riley," he said. "I am." Brooke walked over behind him like she needed to supervise the conversation. Julian looked me up and down once. "Brooke told me you work in tech." "Something like that." "What kind of tech?" I shrugged. "Mostly system maintenance," he smirked. "Oh," he said. "So you're the person who installs Windows for people who forget their passwords." A few nearby guests laughed. I didn't. Julian took a sip of his drink and kept going. "You know the funny thing about the military?" He said loudly enough for the small crowd nearby to hear is taxpayers spend billions on defense systems, and half the time we still end up hiring civilians to come fix our computers. Someone chuckled again. Julian gestured vaguely in my direction. "People like Riley here probably make a living reinstalling operating systems." Brooke laughed. "Exactly," she turned to the group. "Riley's always been our family's little computer helper." I looked down at the floor for a moment. Not because I was embarrassed, because Julian had just pulled his phone out. He stepped away from the group and dialed someone. "Yeah," he said when this call connected. "This is Captain Hayes." He started pacing slowly across the room while talking. "I'm confirming the final payment for tomorrow's reception." He listened for a second. "Right, $150,000 total. Deposit already processed this morning." I wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was looking at the screen. Julian held the phone at a slight angle, just enough for me to see part of the display when he moved his thumb. It was a commercial phone, nothing unusual about that. What was unusual was the connection indicator. Most people would have missed it, but I've spent enough years working around classified networks to notice small details. The routing address flashed for half a second while the connection refreshed. A partial internal IP string appeared on the screen. Not a civilian network. Department of Defense, internal range. Julian kept talking. "Yeah, we'll need confirmation before midnight." He hung up and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. I looked back at the floor. Inside my head, the numbers repeated automatically. 2 segments of the address, clear as day. Brooke clapped her hands to get everyone's attention again. "Okay, I have an announcement." The room quieted. She pointed toward Julian proudly. "My fiancé here just confirmed the final payment for the wedding. $150,000. People applauded. Brooke smiled wider. "And tomorrow," she continued, "I'm marrying one of the most successful officers in the Army." Julian raised his glass again. Someone asked Brooke where I fit into the wedding party. Brooke looked at me. For a second, she didn't say anything. Then she grabbed a napkin from the table and flicked it toward me. It hit my shoulder and slid onto the floor. "I forgot to mention something," she said. The room went quiet again. She crossed her arms. "I don't want a loser in my wedding photos." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Brooke didn't care. She pointed at my sweater. "You show up wearing that, people will think we're running a charity event." Julian chuckled under his breath. Brooke continued. "So here's the situation." She looked directly at me. "You're not invited anymore." The sentence hung in the air for a moment. My father looked like he might say something. He didn't. Brooke stepped closer. "Tomorrow is my day," she said. "I'm not letting a failure ruin it." Another quiet moment passed. Then she added the part she clearly enjoyed the most. "Don't show up." I stood up slowly. No one tried to stop me. No one defended me either. Julian leaned casually against the table, watching like this was entertainment. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. Brooke looked satisfied, like she had just removed a stain from the carpet. She had no idea what I was actually thinking about. Not the napkin, not the insults, not even the wedding. My mind was still on the phone screen. Those numbers had appeared for less than a second. But I didn't need more time than that. Internal Defense Department network, routing tied to a financial transaction, and a $150,000 wedding that Julian Hayes absolutely could not afford on a captain's salary. I slipped my jacket on. Brooke crossed her arms again. "Doors that way," she said. I nodded once. Then I walked toward the exit. Behind me, the party noise slowly returned. People laughing again, glasses clinking, music starting back up. Brooke thought she had just removed the embarrassment of the family. She had no idea the numbers I memorized tonight were about to destroy the perfect life she was building. Because the IP address Julian accidentally exposed wasn't just a network connection, it was evidence. And evidence like that doesn't lead to awkward family arguments. It leads to federal investigations, and sometimes prison. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the quiet person in the room that everyone thought was a failure, while you were the only one who actually understood what was really going on? Tell me in the comments. I drove straight to base. The party music was probably still playing when I pulled into the empty parking lot. The digital clock on my dashboard said 3:42 a.m. Most people on base were asleep at that hour. The few lights still on belonged to people who worked night shifts or people like me. I parked near the secure building and stepped out into the cold morning air. The wind cut straight through my sweater. I zipped my jacket and walked toward the entrance. The building didn't look impressive from the outside. Just gray concrete, no signs, no windows at ground level. Inside it held one of the most restricted rooms on the installation. The SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. No phones allowed, no wireless signals, no outside connections. Everything inside was monitored, logged, and secured. Exactly the place you go when you want answers that can't leak. I scanned my CAC card at the outer door. The reader beeped once, green light, the first door unlocked. Inside the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed quietly above me. The security camera at the corner followed my movement automatically. At the inner checkpoint, I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. Identity confirmed, the system said, through a flat electronic voice. The second door opened. Cold air hit my face the moment I stepped inside the SCIF. The room always felt colder than the rest of the building. Part of it was the climate control for the equipment. Part of it was psychological. People behaved differently in rooms where everything they did was recorded. I sat down at the workstation closest to the wall. 3 monitors, secure keyboard, encrypted login terminal. I inserted my CAC card into the reader and entered my authentication code. The screen flashed through 3 security prompts before granting full access. Warrant Officer Riley Vance, authorized access level high. I opened the network trace tool and leaned back in the chair for a second. The numbers from Julian's phone replayed in my head. 2 segments of the internal IP range. That was enough. I typed the first part into the search field. The system began scanning internal connection logs. Green lines moved across the screen as the database pulled traffic records. After a few seconds, the system found a match. Connection routed through a defense logistics contractor database. That wasn't unusual by itself. The military uses hundreds of contractors every year. But the timestamp caught my attention. 10:17 a.m., yesterday morning. I opened the packet trace. The system expanded the data into a full log. Source connection, routing node, financial gateway, destination account. My eyes moved across the numbers slowly. Something about them felt wrong. I opened a second window and ran a salary lookup for Captain Julian Hayes. Base pay, housing allowance, standard officer compensation. Even with bonuses, his annual income didn't come close to covering a $150,000 wedding. Not even half. I returned to the transaction log and followed the financial routing. The money hadn't come from Julian. It had come from somewhere else. I traced the source account. The system opened a secondary banking record. Offshore, Cayman Islands. That was already bad, but it got worse when I opened the transaction history. The account had received a series of deposits over the last 8 months. All the transfers came from companies that had contracts with defense logistics programs. I opened one of the files. The attached data packet included procurement specifications, fuel transport schedules, vehicle maintenance supply routes, not classified battle plans, but still protected operational data. Exactly the kind of information foreign companies would pay for. I leaned forward slightly in my chair. Julian Hayes wasn't just taking bribes. He was leaking logistical information connected to military operations. I opened another window and searched for the account owner. The screen processed the request for a moment before displaying the beneficiary file. The name appeared in bold text. Brooke Anderson, my sister. I stared at the screen for a few seconds without moving. Then I opened the digital signature verification. The system compared the account authorization file with identity records. Match confirmed. Brooke's driver's license. Brooke's social security number. Brooke's digital banking signature. My sister was the registered beneficiary of the offshore account receiving the money. The wedding deposit Julian bragged about last night had come directly from that account, which meant the two of them weren't just spending dirty money, they were laundering it through a wedding. I leaned back in the chair again. Suddenly, the conversation from last night made more sense. Brooke wasn't embarrassed by my clothes. She wasn't worried about the photos. She was worried about me being in the room. Because someone who worked with military systems might notice details other guests would ignore, like unusual invoices, or financial confirmations, or a captain making phone calls through internal network channels that didn't belong to him. They hadn't kicked me out because I was a failure. They kicked me out because I was the one person at that party who could accidentally expose them. I looked at the transaction log again. Every number lined up. 8 months of payments, multiple contractor leaks, one offshore account, and a very expensive wedding funded by stolen federal money. I reached over to the side of the desk and grabbed the paper coffee cup I brought in with me. The coffee was still hot. I took a slow sip and placed it back down. Then I opened the internal enforcement menu. Most people on base never see that screen. The options inside it are restricted for a reason. Asset tracing, security suspension, federal investigation referrals, and one command near the bottom of the list. Comprehensive freeze protocol. It wasn't something you activated casually. The protocol automatically locked any military access credentials connected to an active investigation. It also froze financial transfers linked to flagged accounts. In other words, it shut everything down at once. I rested my fingers on the keyboard for a moment. Then I began typing. Julian Hayes, Captain, United States Army, active duty, connected financial account flagged for investigation. Secondary beneficiary Brooke Anderson. The system asked for confirmation. I took another sip of coffee and hit enter. Processing request. The command moved through the network faster than any phone call Julian could make. Within seconds, his security credentials were marked for review. His network access would collapse the moment he tried to use it. His financial transfer scheduled for later that morning would fail. And the offshore account funding his perfect wedding was now flagged in a federal monitoring system. I watched the status bar finish loading. Then the final message appeared on the screen. Protocol initiated. All I had done was follow the numbers, but numbers don't lie. And once they're inside a federal system, they don't disappear either. I closed the trace window and leaned back in my chair again. Outside the SCIF, the sky was probably starting to turn gray with morning light. Inside the room, the monitors still glowed blue against the wall. I took another slow sip of coffee and started typing the next authorization command. Complete freeze. Because if Julian Hayes wanted to have a perfect wedding today, he was about to learn something important. You can't build a celebration on stolen federal money, not when the person you tried to humiliate last night happens to be the one with the authority to shut everything down. I was still inside the SCIF when my phone started vibrating in the locker outside. Phones aren't allowed inside secure rooms, so mine had been sitting in a metal tray near the entrance the whole time. I noticed the vibration when I stepped out to refill my coffee. Arthur Anderson, my father. The call had already gone to voicemail once. He was calling again. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Yeah. There was no greeting on the other end. Just my father's voice, already irritated. Where are you at work? You're not coming to the wedding, straight to the point. No surprise there. No. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't mention the fact that his older daughter had publicly thrown me out of the event the night before. Instead, he sighed heavily into the phone, like I had just caused him a personal inconvenience. Well, he said, since you're not showing up, you can at least make yourself useful. I leaned against the hallway wall outside the SCIF door. What do you need? Julian's a little tight on cash right now. That sentence alone was almost impressive. Julian had just confirmed a $150,000 wedding payment 12 hours earlier, and somehow he was still tight on cash. My father continued talking. They're flying to the Maldives tomorrow morning for their honeymoon. Of course they were. That kind of trip requires liquidity, he said, like he was explaining something complicated. I said nothing. Arthur lowered his voice slightly, the way people do when they're about to deliver an order they think should sound reasonable. You have savings, right? Yes. Good. He paused. Transfer $10,000 to Brooke. Not a request, a command. I looked down the hallway toward the SCIF door. The biometric scanner blinked quietly on the wall. My father kept talking. Consider it your contribution to the family. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked one simple question. Why would I do that? There was a short silence on the line. Arthur clearly wasn't used to that response. Because you're her sister. That's not an answer. His voice hardened. You didn't attend the wedding rehearsal dinner properly dressed. I blinked slowly. You embarrassed your sister. That was the official reason. Not the napkin thrown at my shoulder. Not the public humiliation. My sweater, Arthur continued. So the least you can do is help with the honeymoon expenses. I heard a sound in the background. Someone else in the room. A quiet laugh. Brooke. She wasn't even trying to hide it. My father lowered his voice again. 10,000 isn't much for you, he said. How do you know that? You work for the government. That was his entire understanding of my job. Government equals money. I pushed off the wall and walked back toward the SCIF door. Inside the room, the monitors were still glowing blue. Arthur spoke again. You've always been difficult, Riley. This is a chance to finally do something useful for this family. Another small laugh in the background. Brooke again. I imagined her sitting on the couch, still wearing that smug expression from the night before, probably scrolling through wedding photos, probably still convinced she had removed the embarrassment of the family. I opened the SCIF door and stepped inside. The air felt colder than before. Are you still there? My father asked. Yes. Good. So you'll transfer the money. I sat down at the workstation and woke the monitors. The system immediately returned to the investigation dashboard I had left open. Julian Hayes, account flagged, security review pending. My father spoke again. Riley. I picked up the coffee cup and took a slow sip. Then I answered him in the same calm tone I would use during a formal briefing. Dad. What? There's a rule we follow in the military. He sounded annoyed already. What rule? The first rule is you never load ammunition for your enemy. Silence. He didn't understand the sentence yet. What are you talking about? My voice stayed steady. My money isn't going to fund treason. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Arthur's voice exploded. What did you just say? Before he could continue yelling, I heard Brooke's voice clearly in the background. What did she say? Arthur repeated it. She's talking nonsense about treason. Brooke laughed again. That same careless laugh from the night before. I didn't bother explaining. I simply ended the call. The phone screen went dark in my hand. For a few seconds, the room was completely quiet, except for the low hum of the server equipment. Then I placed the phone on the desk and turned back to the monitor. The investigation dashboard still displayed Julian's credentials. Captain Julian Hayes, active duty access card. Status pending review. That status wouldn't last long. Because I still had administrative control over one system Julian probably forgot existed. CAC Access Management. Common Access Card. Every military member carries one. Without it, you don't enter buildings. You don't log into networks. You don't access secure areas. And most importantly, you don't walk into a base like you own the place. I opened the credential control panel. The system displayed Julian's profile again. Photograph, rank, unit assignment, access clearance, and a row of command options underneath. Update, flag, suspend, revoke. I rested my fingers on the keyboard. Some people think revenge looks dramatic. Raised voices, arguments. Maybe someone throwing a drink. Real consequences usually look quieter than that. Just a cursor blinking on a screen, waiting for a decision. I selected suspend credentials. The system prompted for confirmation, reason for action. I typed the response in one short sentence. Security risk under active investigation. Then I pressed enter. The command executed instantly. Julian Hayes' CAC card was now suspended across the entire federal network. If he tried to enter the base, if he tried to log into a system, if he tried to access any secure building, the answer would be the same: denied. I leaned back slightly in the chair. The wedding ceremony was probably starting in a few hours. Guests arriving, music playing, Brooke posing for photos, Julian shaking hands with people who believed he was a successful officer. None of them knew that the next time he tried to walk through a security gate, the system would treat him like a threat. And the best part? He would have no idea why. I closed the credential window and sat there for a moment watching the system update Julian Hayes' access status across the network. Suspended. That single word traveled through every base checkpoint database within seconds. Which meant somewhere, eventually, someone would notice. I didn't have to wait long. About 2 hours later, I was sitting in a different building across the base. The command building had large windows facing the parking lot, but the office I was in kept the blinds half closed. The room smelled like black coffee and printer paper. I was reviewing the financial logs again when the intercom on the desk buzzed. The aide outside spoke calmly. "Ma'am, the general will see you now." I stood up and walked into the next office. General Robert Sterling didn't bother with decorations. His office had a desk, 2 chairs, a wall map, and a framed flag. 4 silver stars sat on the shoulders of his uniform. People outside the military sometimes think rank is just decoration. It isn't. 4 stars mean decisions that affect thousands of people, sometimes millions. Sterling looked up from a folder when I entered. "Morning, Warrant Officer Vance." "Morning, sir." I sat down across from him. He slid a printed document across the desk. "Your report came through at 5:30. I expected it would." He nodded once. "Interesting pattern. That's one way to describe it." Sterling flipped another page in the folder. "Captain Julian Hayes." He paused slightly. "Your sister's fiancé." "Yes, sir." The general didn't look surprised. He had probably already read every line of the investigation summary. What triggered the trace? I answered simply. "He made a phone call in front of me." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Careless." "Yes, sir." The general leaned back in his chair. For someone moving federal money through offshore accounts, careless is a generous description. I didn't respond. Sterling looked toward the small console on the side of his desk. "That brings us to the current situation." He pressed a button. A speaker crackled to life. For a moment, there was only wind noise. Then someone started shouting. "I don't care what the machine says, Julian." His voice was loud and angry. "You scan the card again." A different voice responded. "Calm, professional, sir, your credentials are flagged in the system." "That's impossible." Metal rattled in the background. "Probably the security gate." Julian spoke again, louder this time. "I'm a captain in the United States Army." "Yes, sir. Then fix the system." "Sir, the system indicates your access has been revoked." Another pause. Then the security guard read the screen. Level 1 security risk. Even through the speaker, I could hear the sudden shift in Julian's breathing. "What access revoked, sir? That's a mistake." "Sir, we cannot override a level 1 alert." A car door slammed somewhere near the microphone. Julian's voice came back closer now. "Call your supervisor." "Sir, we already notified command." "That's ridiculous." He sounded panicked now. "I have clearance for this base." "Yes, sir, the system no longer recognizes that clearance." Sterling glanced at me while the recording continued. Julian's voice dropped lower, angrier. "I swear to God, if someone in the IT department screwed with my account, they're finished." Another guard spoke quietly in the background. Julian ignored him. "This is probably that little sister of Brooke's." My name came out of his mouth like an insult. "That girl works in tech. She probably thought this would be funny." Sterling muted the speaker for a moment. He rested his hands on the desk. "Your family seems to think you work in technical support." I shrugged. "That assumption has been useful." The general nodded slowly, then he turned the speaker back on. Julian was still arguing at the gate. "I'll call the Pentagon if I have to." "Sir, you're welcome to contact your chain of command." "Oh, I will." His phone must have come out of his pocket because a moment later his voice shifted slightly. Brooke, pick up. There was a pause. Then Julian spoke again. Yeah, there's some idiot at the base gate telling me my credentials are revoked. He listened. No, that's impossible. Another pause. I know I confirmed the wedding payment yesterday. His voice lowered. Look, it's probably Riley messing with something in their IT department. Even through the speaker, I could hear Brooke's voice faintly on the other end. Julian spoke again. No, don't worry, I'll get it fixed. Sterling muted the audio again. The room went quiet. The general folded his hands. That man planned to access a logistics server this morning. Yes, sir. We verified the request. He slid another paper across the desk. According to the file, he told his unit he needed to retrieve a document. I glanced at the paper. Logistics procurement summary, sensitive contractor data. Exactly the kind of information someone might call a gift for a foreign partner. Sterling leaned back in his chair. You understand what this means? Yes, sir. Captain Hayes wasn't just moving money. No, sir, he was preparing another transfer. Yes. The general looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he turned his attention back to me. You initiated the access suspension. I did. Correct call. He tapped the desk once. Now the question becomes operational. He unmuted the speaker again. Julian was still shouting at the guards outside the gate. I want the name of whoever did this. The guard responded calmly. Sir, the system indicates the suspension came from command authority. Julian's voice cracked slightly. What command authority? Sterling muted the speaker one last time. Then he looked directly at me. His expression didn't change much, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Warrant Officer Vance. Yes, sir. Would you like to handle this personally? I understood the question. The military police could handle the arrest. They were already preparing the paperwork. But the general was offering me something else. Control of the moment. Control of the confrontation. Outside the window, the morning sun had started to rise over the base parking lot. I stood up slowly from the chair. Then I reached up and adjusted the collar of my uniform jacket. I'll take care of it myself, sir. Sterling nodded once. Very well. He slid a small folder toward me across the desk. Inside were the preliminary arrest documents and the financial records connecting Julian Hayes to the offshore account, which also connected him to Brooke. Sterling leaned back again. Clean operation, Vance. Yes, sir. He paused. Then added one more sentence. Just remember something. What's that, sir, when family decides to burn their own house down? He gestured toward the folder. Someone still has to clean up the mess. I picked up the file. I understand. Then I turned toward the door, because somewhere outside the base gate, Captain Julian Hayes was still yelling at a security scanner that no longer recognized him, and he had no idea the person responsible was about to walk through the door. I closed the folder and walked out of the command building. The air outside had warmed up since morning. The base parking lot was already filling with vehicles. Most of them belonged to people starting a normal workday. Across town, 300 people were getting dressed for a wedding. Brooke had chosen one of the most expensive venues in the city, a glass ballroom attached to a luxury hotel downtown, the kind of place that charges 5 figures just to rent the room. By noon, the building was already full. White tablecloths, crystal centerpieces, a stage for the band. Every chair lined up perfectly for the ceremony. Guests moved through the lobby in expensive suits and dresses. People shook hands, exchanged compliments, and talked about the weather like this was any other celebration. To them it was. To me it was evidence. Because the entire event had been paid for with money Julian Hayes didn't legally earn. Inside the bridal suite upstairs, Brooke stood in front of a full-length mirror. Her wedding dress had taken 6 months to design. Hand-sewn pearls, long train, perfectly arranged veil. 3 bridesmaids hovered around her, adjusting small details. Brooke lifted her phone and turned slightly toward the mirror. Hold on, she said. I need one more photo. She tilted the camera carefully, making sure the dress filled the frame. Click. She looked at the picture and smiled. Perfect. One of the bridesmaids laughed. You look amazing. Brooke opened Instagram and began typing a caption. Best day of my life. She paused, thinking for a moment. Then she added another sentence. No losers dragging us down today. The bridesmaids laughed again. Brooke hit post. Within seconds, the notifications started appearing. Likes, comments, congratulations. She set the phone down on the table and looked back at herself in the mirror. Somewhere in her mind, she probably pictured me sitting alone in my apartment. maybe crying, maybe regretting not being invited. Brooke had always liked simple stories: winner, loser, success, failure. Reality tends to be less convenient. Downstairs in the ballroom, my father moved from table to table greeting guests. Arthur Anderson looked proud. He wore a black tuxedo and shook hands with every person who walked through the door. "Thank you for coming," he said over and over. "This wedding means a lot to our family." People congratulated him, complimented the decorations, mentioned how impressive Julian's military career sounded. Arthur accepted every compliment like it confirmed something he already believed: that his family was finally successful, that his older daughter had married well, that everything had worked out exactly the way he planned. The only person missing was the groom. Julian Hayes was late. 20 minutes before the ceremony, a black BMW finally pulled into the hotel driveway. Julian stepped out of the car quickly. His tie was slightly crooked. There was sweat on his forehead. The base gate incident had taken longer to resolve than he expected. He walked into the lobby with the confident posture he always used in public. Confidence can survive a lot of stress as long as no one knows the reason behind it. Arthur spotted him immediately. "Julian," my father walked over. "Where have you been? The ceremony starts soon." Julian adjusted his jacket and forced a smile. Last-minute meeting, with who Julian didn't hesitate. Pentagon liaison. Arthur nodded like that explanation made perfect sense. Important business, exactly. Julian wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Arthur lowered his voice slightly. "Everything all right?" "Of course." Julian straightened his tie again. "Just routine logistics." Arthur seemed satisfied with that answer. Most people don't question things they want to believe. Julian walked toward the elevator leading to the bridal suite. As the doors closed, he took his phone out and stared at the screen. Several missed calls from an unknown government number. He ignored them. Right now, he had a wedding to attend. And as far as he knew, the worst problem of the day had already happened. The ballroom downstairs continued filling with guests. Champagne glasses clinked together. The band played soft music while people found their seats. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked normal. What none of them noticed was what was happening outside. Across the street, 3 black SUVs turned slowly into the hotel entrance. No flashing lights, no sirens. Just 3 armored government vehicles moving quietly into the VIP parking area. They parked in a row. The doors opened almost at the same time. Several people stepped out. Men in dark suits, plainclothes, calm expressions. They moved with the kind of coordination that only comes from training. One of them checked a tablet. Another spoke briefly into a small radio. Their movements were efficient, controlled. Each person walked toward a different entrance of the building: front lobby, side hallway, service corridor. Within 2 minutes, every exit route from the ballroom had someone standing near it, not blocking the doors, just watching them. From inside the hotel, the guests couldn't see any of it. All they saw were chandeliers and flower arrangements, music and laughter, 300 people celebrating a perfect wedding. Upstairs, Brooke checked her phone again. Her Instagram post had already collected hundreds of likes. She smiled at the screen. "See," she said to the bridesmaids. Everything turned out exactly how it should. One of them asked a simple question. "What about your sister?" Brooke rolled her eyes. "She knows better than to show up." Then she laughed. "If she does, security will handle it." Outside the building, one of the agents in a dark suit spoke quietly into his radio. "Positions confirmed." Another voice answered through the earpiece. "Command vehicle arriving." The final SUV rolled slowly into the parking lot behind the others. Its windows were tinted dark enough that no one inside the hotel noticed who stepped out. But the operation was already in motion. And inside the ballroom, the wedding guests were still raising glasses to celebrate a perfect day. They just didn't realize the celebration was about to end. The band had just finished playing the opening song when the wedding reception officially started. 300 guests filled the ballroom. Crystal glasses, white flowers, gold plates reflecting the chandelier light. Everything looked exactly the way Brooke wanted it. Perfect. Julian stood near the stage beside her, one arm loosely around her waist. His smile looked normal from a distance. Only someone standing close would notice the tension in his jaw. The base gate incident had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. But he was good at pretending. Arthur stepped onto the small stage and picked up the microphone. The room slowly quieted. My father cleared his throat and smiled at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you all for being here tonight." A few guests raised their glasses. Arthur gestured proudly toward Julian. "As many of you know, my daughter Brooke has chosen an exceptional man." Julian nodded politely like he had heard the speech before. "Captain Julian Hayes," Arthur continued, "has served this country with honor." Several guests clapped. Arthur raised his glass. "And today our family is proud to welcome him as a son." More applause. Julian lifted his champagne glass. Brooke squeezed his arm. Arthur was about to continue the speech when something unexpected happened. The large oak doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Not gently, the heavy handles turned and the doors swung wide. The sound echoed across the room. Every head turned. The hotel security guards near the entrance immediately stepped forward. From their perspective, it looked simple. Someone was entering a private wedding without permission. One guard started walking toward the door. Then he stopped, because the person entering didn't look like a random guest. I stepped into the room. The sound of conversation died almost instantly. The last time my family had seen me, I was wearing a gray sweater and jeans. Tonight I wasn't. My uniform was Army Class A dress blues, pressed jacket, polished brass buttons, service ribbons across the chest, rank insignia clean and sharp. The difference between those two versions of me wasn't just clothing, it was authority. The security guards slowed down when they saw the uniform. One of them hesitated. But the reason the room froze wasn't me, it was the man walking beside me. General Robert Sterling moved with calm, controlled steps. Older, straight posture, calm expression. 4 silver stars on his shoulders. Inside a room full of civilians, those stars might have gone unnoticed. But there were military officers in the audience, and they recognized them immediately. One lieutenant standing near the bar lowered his drink. His back straightened instantly. Then his heels struck the floor, hard. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Another officer followed, then another. Within seconds, every military member in the ballroom was standing at attention, glasses lowered, spines straight, boots aligned. The sound of heels hitting the floor echoed again, sharp, dry, respect. Civilian guests looked around in confusion. They didn't understand what was happening, but Julian did. His champagne glass froze halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face, because he recognized the man walking next to me. General Robert Sterling wasn't just any officer. He was the commanding general overseeing several operational commands. The kind of officer captains like Julian only saw from across a conference room. Not the kind who casually attends weddings, especially not weddings connected to an investigation. Brooke blinked. She didn't understand military rank. To her, the uniform just looked impressive. She leaned toward Julian. "Why is Riley here?" Julian didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the 4 stars, moving across the room. The entire ballroom had gone quiet. Even the band had stopped playing. General Sterling and I walked slowly between the tables. Guests leaned slightly out of their chairs to watch. Some whispered, others just stared. Arthur still stood on the stage, holding the microphone. He looked confused, then annoyed, then worried. Because suddenly the situation looked very different from the speech he planned to give. We reached the open area in front of the stage. General Sterling stopped. I stopped beside him. The military officers in the room remained standing. The civilians stayed silent. Arthur finally spoke into the microphone again. His voice sounded uncertain now. "Riley?" He tried to laugh slightly. "I thought Brooke made it clear you weren't invited." Brooke stepped forward beside Julian. Her expression turned angry immediately. "I told you not to come," she snapped. Then she noticed the general standing beside me. Her voice lost some of its confidence. "And who is this?" Julian still hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on the silver stars. General Sterling looked up toward the stage. His expression stayed calm, professional, but the authority in his presence filled the entire room. Arthur cleared his throat again. "Well," he said awkwardly, "since everyone's here." He lifted his glass again. "Let's continue the celebration." No one moved. No one raised a glass, because the officers in the room were still standing at attention. And no one breaks that posture when a 4-star general is present. Julian's hand started shaking slightly. He finally placed the champagne glass back on the table. The quiet in the room stretched longer. Brooke looked around irritated. "Why is everyone acting weird?" No one answered. Because the situation was no longer a wedding. It was a military hierarchy, walking into a civilian celebration. and everyone who understood that hierarchy already knew something serious was about to happen. Julian swallowed slowly. His voice came out lower now. "Sir." General Sterling looked directly at him, and in that moment, Captain Julian Hayes understood something the rest of the guests hadn't figured out yet. The most powerful officer in the command had just walked into his wedding, and he wasn't there to congratulate anyone. The silence in the ballroom stretched long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. 300 guests sat frozen in their chairs. The band members stared at their instruments. The waiters stopped moving. General Sterling stood beside me without saying a word. Julian looked like a man who had suddenly realized the floor beneath him might not be stable. Brooke was the first one to react. She stepped forward quickly, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Her eyes locked on me. Anger came first, confusion second, and then the kind of rage she used whenever something didn't go the way she planned. "I told you not to come." Her voice cut through the quiet. She pointed directly at me. "You're not invited to this wedding." The room remained silent. Brooke looked around expecting someone to support her. No one moved, so she said it louder. "I said she's not invited." She turned toward the security guards standing near the entrance. Security, one of them shifted slightly. "Throw her out." Still nothing happened. Brooke's voice rose again. "Did you hear me?" One of the guards finally spoke. Quietly, "We can't do that, ma'am." Brooke blinked. "What do you mean you can't?" The guard glanced toward the back of the room. 2 men in dark uniforms had stepped inside without anyone noticing. Military police. Their presence was calm but unmistakable. They didn't move closer. They didn't say anything. They just stood there watching. Brooke looked back at me again, then at General Sterling. Her expression turned even more irritated. "Who is this guy?" Julian still hadn't answered her. Arthur stepped down from the stage quickly. He walked toward us with the kind of determined expression fathers use when they think they need to control a situation. "Riley," his voice sounded sharp. "What exactly are you doing here?" He gestured toward the general. "And why are you bringing strangers into your sister's wedding?" Arthur clearly believed he still had authority in this moment. He moved closer and lowered his voice slightly. "You've embarrassed this family enough already." Then he looked at General Sterling. "I'm sorry about this," Arthur said politely. "My younger daughter sometimes forgets her place." General Sterling didn't look at him, not even once. Arthur might as well have been a piece of furniture. The general's attention remained fixed on Julian, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire room. "Captain Hayes." Julian straightened immediately. "Sir?" The word came out automatically. Sterling took one step forward. "I believe my director of network operations has something for you." He gestured slightly toward me. "Warrant Officer Vance." The title hung in the air. Several people in the audience whispered quietly, because that sentence revealed something most of them didn't expect. I wasn't just the awkward younger sister sitting in the corner of family events. I worked directly under the authority of a 4-star general. Arthur frowned. "What did he just call you?" I didn't answer him. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my dress uniform. Then I pulled out a thin folder. The red federal classification stamp across the front made the situation very clear. "Confidential." I stepped forward. Julian didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the folder. I opened it calmly. "Captain Hayes." My voice stayed level, professional. "The financial transfer you initiated yesterday morning." I turned one of the documents so he could see it. $150,000. Julian's breathing slowed. The room stayed silent. That transfer was routed through an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I flipped the page. "The funds have been seized by federal authorities." Arthur's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I ignored him. Because this wasn't a family argument, it was a report. I looked directly at Julian. "The account receiving the funds has been under investigation for 8 months. Julian didn't respond. He couldn't, because the next sentence was the one that mattered. I lifted the final document, and the registered beneficiary on that account. I turned slightly toward Brooke. "Is Brooke Anderson?" Brooke stared at the page like it was written in another language. "That's not possible." Her voice sounded small now. "You're lying." I placed the document back in the folder. "The signature on the account authorization matches your banking records." She shook her head. "No." Then she looked at Julian. "Tell them." Julian didn't say anything. His silence said more than any explanation could. I closed the folder. "Captain Hayes," I said calmly, "you've been leaking logistics contract data to a foreign shell company." Arthur grabbed my arm suddenly. That's enough. His voice shook with anger. You don't come into this wedding and accuse people of crimes. I looked down at his hand, then back at his face. This isn't an accusation. I gently pulled my arm free. It's evidence. The room felt colder. Brooke's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered. The sound echoed across the silent ballroom. Crystal pieces scattered in every direction. Brooke didn't look down. She just stared at Julian. Tell them this is a mistake. Julian's mouth opened, then closed again, because there wasn't anything he could say that would fix the situation anymore. The investigation had already reached the point where words didn't matter. Only documents did. And the documents were already in the hands of the people who enforce federal law. General Sterling stepped forward slightly. His voice remained calm, but the authority in it filled the entire room. Captain Hayes. Julian stood rigid. Yes, sir. Sterling looked at him for a long moment. Then he said the sentence that ended the illusion this wedding had been built on. You will review the documents provided by Warrant Officer Vance. He paused. And you will sign where indicated. No one in the room spoke, because everyone understood something important at that moment. This was no longer a celebration. It was the beginning of a federal arrest. The moment General Sterling finished speaking, the room stayed quiet. No shouting, no dramatic arguments, just silence. The kind that happens when 300 people suddenly realize they're watching something that wasn't supposed to be public. The band members near the stage looked at each other. One violinist slowly lowered his bow. The music stopped mid-note. General Sterling didn't move. Neither did I, but the room was no longer under the control of the wedding planner. It belonged to someone else now. The side doors of the ballroom opened, then the service entrance, then the hallway near the bar. Men in dark suits stepped inside from every direction. CID, Criminal Investigation Division. They didn't rush. They walked calmly across the marble floor with the quiet confidence of people who already know the outcome. Each one carried a small badge clipped to the inside of his jacket. Some guests leaned sideways in their chairs to see what was happening. Others pulled their phones out before quickly realizing they probably shouldn't record federal agents. Julian finally moved. His hands shook as he looked around the room. 2 CID agents approached him slowly. Captain Hayes. The first agent spoke calmly. We're going to need you to come with us. Julian swallowed. This is a misunderstanding. Neither agent responded. Julian looked past them toward General Sterling. Sir. His voice cracked slightly. This has to be a mistake. Sterling didn't answer, because the investigation was no longer his responsibility. CID handled criminal cases, not commanding officers. Julian took a step forward, then another, and suddenly his confidence collapsed. His knees hit the marble floor. The sound echoed across the silent ballroom. A captain in dress uniform kneeling in front of 300 wedding guests. Sir, please. His voice sounded desperate now. I can explain. No one interrupted him. I was under pressure. His words came out quickly. I had debts. I thought I could fix it later. He looked directly at General Sterling. Please don't ruin my career. Sterling's expression didn't change. Julian reached toward the folder still in my hands. I'll return the money. His voice broke again. I swear I'll fix everything. One of the CID agents stepped closer. Captain Hayes. He gently pulled Julian's hands behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked open. Cold steel. Professional. Routine. The agent positioned Julian's wrists together. Then the cuffs closed. The sound of the locking mechanism snapped sharply in the quiet room. Click. It was louder than the band had been a minute earlier. Julian lowered his head. His shoulders collapsed forward. The illusion of control he had carried all day disappeared in a single second. Brooke finally reacted. What are you doing? She rushed forward. The long train of her wedding dress dragged across the floor behind her. Stop, her voice cracked. You can't arrest him. The CID agent looked at her briefly. Ma'am, please step back. Brooke grabbed Julian's arm. Julian, he didn't look at her. Tell them, her voice became louder. Tell them they're wrong. Julian stayed silent. That silence was the first moment Brooke started to understand something had actually gone wrong. Her eyes moved toward me, then toward the agents, then back to Julian. No, she shook her head. No, this isn't happening. The white fabric of her dress brushed against the broken glass, still scattered on the floor from earlier. One of the pearls near the hem popped loose and rolled across the marble. Brooke didn't notice. She grabbed Julian again. Say something. Julian didn't speak. Because once the cuffs close, explanations don't change much. Two agents lifted him gently from the floor. They guided him toward the exit. Brooke stumbled backward. Her veil slipped slightly off her head. Her makeup had started to run. Mom. She looked toward the front table where our parents sat. Dad. Arthur stood up slowly. His face had gone completely pale. The confident host from earlier was gone. Now he looked like a man watching his entire plan collapse. Brooke walked toward him quickly. You have to do something. Arthur didn't move. His eyes stayed on Julian, being escorted across the ballroom. Dad. Her voice cracked again. Say something. Arthur finally looked away from the agents. His eyes moved toward me. For a moment he just stared. Then he rushed across the floor. Riley, his voice sounded desperate. I didn't move. Arthur stopped a few feet in front of me. You can fix this. I didn't respond. You work for the military. His breathing had become uneven. You have authority. The room stayed silent around us. 300 guests watching a family argument no one expected to see. Arthur stepped closer. Riley, his voice lowered. Please. He pointed toward Brooke, who now stood near the stage holding the front of her ruined dress. She's your sister, his voice broke. She made mistakes. Then he said the sentence he probably never imagined he would say to me. Use your power to help her. He swallowed hard. I'm begging you. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Not angry, not confident. Just afraid. Riley, please. He pointed again toward Brooke. She's blood. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even change my expression. Because the people he was pointing at were the same people who had spent years reminding me I didn't belong in their version of success. And now suddenly I was the only one in the room who could save them. I didn't answer my father right away. The ballroom had changed completely in less than 15 minutes. The same guests who had arrived smiling earlier were now quietly collecting their coats. Conversations were low and awkward. No one wanted to look directly at anyone else. People avoided eye contact the way they do when they accidentally witness something private. Except this wasn't private. 300 people had just watched a groom get arrested during his own wedding reception. CID agents escorted Julian toward the exit. His hands were still cuffed behind his back. The polished marble floor reflected the overhead lights as they walked. No one clapped. No one spoke. Julian kept his head down. For a man who spent months acting like the most confident officer in every room, the silence must have felt unbearable. One of the agents opened the side door. Cold evening air drifted into the ballroom. Outside, the black SUVs were still parked exactly where they had arrived. Julian stepped through the doorway. The doors closed behind him. Brooke stood near the stage. Her wedding dress looked different now. The long white fabric dragged unevenly across the floor. The train had picked up dust. A few pearls had fallen loose. Her makeup had smeared along her cheek. She stared at the closed doors like she expected Julian to walk back in. He didn't. One of the CID agents approached her. Ma'am, his voice stayed calm. You'll need to come with us as well. Brooke shook her head slowly. No. The word came out quietly. I didn't do anything. The agent held up the document. This account lists you as the beneficiary. Brooke stepped backward. That's not a crime. Her voice sounded desperate now. I didn't know where the money came from. The agent didn't argue. He simply repeated the instruction. Please come with us. Brooke looked toward our parents. Mom. Diane had been sitting silently at the table the entire time. Her hands covered her mouth. Her mascara had started running long before anyone noticed. Mom, say something. Diane didn't move. Brooke looked at Arthur again. Dad. Arthur still stood a few feet in front of me. His shoulders slumped. His face looked 10 years older than it had earlier that evening. Brooke took another step backward. The heel of her shoe caught the edge of the stage. She grabbed the front of her dress to keep from falling. Dad, please. Arthur didn't answer her. The CID agents waited. After a few seconds, Brooke stopped resisting. Her shoulders dropped. She let the agent take her arm. The white fabric of her dress brushed across the floor as they guided her toward the exit. The room stayed silent while she walked. Some guests turned their heads away. Others watched carefully, because moments like that stick in people's memories for a long time. The doors opened again. Brooke stepped outside. The doors closed, and just like that, the wedding was over. The band members quietly packed their instruments. The waiters began clearing untouched plates. One by one, the guests left the ballroom. No one said goodbye. No one offered congratulations. Within minutes, the room looked almost empty. Only a few tables remained occupied. Most of the flowers still stood in their arrangements, but without the music and laughter, they looked different. Like decorations left behind after something unpleasant. My father slowly turned toward the center of the room. Arthur Anderson had spent his entire life building the image of a perfect family, successful daughter, respected son-in-law, elegant wedding. In less than 15 minutes, that image collapsed. The expensive flowers now looked like funeral arrangements. The crystal glasses sat untouched. The room echoed slightly when someone moved a chair. Diane stood up from her seat. Her legs looked unsteady. She walked toward me slowly. Riley. Her voice trembled. She reached out as if she wanted to touch my arm. Please. I didn't move. Arthur stepped closer as well. You don't understand. His voice sounded hoarse. Your sister made mistakes. He looked toward the doors again. But she's still family. I watched him quietly. For most of my life, Arthur had spoken to me like I was a problem that needed to be fixed. Not a daughter, not someone he was proud of, just the quiet kid who didn't fit the image he wanted. Now he was asking for help. Riley, he tried again. You have influence. He gestured weakly toward the door where General Sterling had stepped aside earlier. You can talk to him. My mother nodded quickly. Yes. Her voice broke. He listens to you. Arthur took another step forward. Just ask them to go easy on Brooke. I looked at both of them for a moment. Then I slowly stepped backward. Exactly one step. Far enough that my mother's hand couldn't reach me anymore. I adjusted the white gloves on my uniform. The fabric felt smooth and clean. My voice stayed calm when I spoke. You're not upset about what Brooke did. Arthur frowned. That's not true, I continued. You're upset because you just realized who I work for. They both stayed silent. You spent years treating me like a cheap lottery ticket that didn't pay out. I glanced briefly toward the door where the general stood waiting, but tonight you finally noticed the 4 stars on his shoulders. Arthur's mouth opened slightly. No words came out. I finished adjusting the gloves. The wedding is over. The words sounded simple, direct. And so is your right to call me family. My mother started crying quietly. Arthur stood frozen. Neither of them tried to stop me again. I turned and walked toward the exit. General Sterling waited near the doors. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded once when I approached. Outside, the night air felt cooler than the ballroom. The black SUVs were still parked near the entrance. One of the CID vehicles had already left. Another was preparing to move. Sterling opened the passenger door for me. Ready? Yes, sir. I took one last look at the hotel behind us. Inside those walls, my parents were probably still standing in a room full of empty chairs and expensive flowers. A perfect wedding turned into a federal investigation. Sterling closed the door after I sat down. The engine started. The car pulled away from the hotel entrance. And for the first time that entire day, I felt completely calm. Before we finish, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have helped your family after everything they did? Or would you walk away the same way I did? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories about justice consequences and people finally getting exactly what they deserve, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The car pulled away from the hotel slowly. I watched the building disappear through the window as the driver turned onto the main road. The lights from the ballroom were still glowing behind the glass walls, but the celebration inside was already over. 15 minutes earlier, 300 people had been drinking champagne and talking about a perfect wedding. Now federal agents were loading 2 suspects into government vehicles. Life changes fast when the truth finally shows up. General Sterling sat beside me in the back seat. He didn't say anything for a while. He simply looked out the window as the city lights passed by. After a minute, he nodded once. You handled that professionally. That was all he said. No long speech, no dramatic congratulations. Just a simple statement, coming from a 4-star general, that meant more than any applause inside that ballroom. I nodded back. Thank you, sir. Then the car became quiet again. The silence gave me time to think. Not about Brooke, not about Julian, not even about the investigation that would take months to finish. I thought about something else. Why the entire situation had happened in the first place. Because the truth is, none of what happened that night started at the wedding. It started years earlier. It started with the way people decide who matters and who doesn't. My family had always believed in appearances. Success meant expensive things, nice cars, big houses, photos that look impressive on social media. Brooke understood that system perfectly. She always knew how to present herself as the successful one, confident, stylish, popular. I was the opposite, quiet, private, working jobs that didn't sound impressive at family dinners. When someone asked what Brooke did, my parents answered proudly. When someone asked what I did, the explanation was usually shorter. Something with computers. That description worked for them. It made the story simple. Brooke was the success. I was the disappointment. But here's something most people don't realize. People who judge success by appearances usually don't understand how real work actually looks. The people designing secure systems, the people protecting military networks, the people analyzing data in rooms without windows. Those jobs don't come with glamorous stories. Most of the time they come with long hours and quiet offices. No one posts photos of themselves reviewing security logs at 4 a.m, but those jobs matter. They protect things most people never even think about. And the people doing them usually learn something important. Real work doesn't need an audience. Another thing I realized that night is something many people struggle to admit. Family isn't automatically a safe place. Some families support you, encourage you, respect you. Others don't. Sometimes the people who share your last name are also the people who underestimate you the most. My father didn't call me that morning to ask if I was okay after being thrown out of the wedding. He called to ask for $10,000. That moment told me everything I needed to know. Not about money, about priorities. Because when someone sees you as a resource instead of a person, the relationship is already broken. That's when boundaries become necessary. A lot of people think boundaries are cruel. They think saying no to family is selfish. But sometimes boundaries are the only healthy decision you can make. You can't build a healthy life around people who only value you when they need something. Another lesson from that night was about silence. When Brooke insulted me at the party, I didn't argue. When Julian mocked my job, I didn't correct him. Some people watching probably assumed I was weak. But silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence is observation. When people believe you're not a threat, they talk freely. They reveal things they shouldn't. Julian didn't expose that network address because he was careless with technology. He exposed it because he was careless with confidence. He assumed I was too unimportant to notice. That assumption ended his career, which leads to another lesson that matters more than revenge. Skill is protection. The reason I could act that night wasn't because of luck. It wasn't because of connections. It was because of years of work most people never saw. Training, security clearances, technical knowledge, responsibility. Those things build authority slowly. But once they exist, they matter far more than someone's opinion at a family dinner. A lot of people chase the appearance of success, but the reality is simple. Real skills give you options, and options give you freedom. Freedom to walk away from situations that don't respect you. Freedom to say no when someone demands something unfair. And freedom to stand calmly in a room where everyone once believed you didn't belong. The final thing I realized that night is something people misunderstand about justice. Justice isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It doesn't require screaming or humiliating someone. All justice really requires is the truth reaching the right system. Once the truth enters that system, the process takes over. Evidence gets reviewed, accounts get frozen, credentials get suspended, agents knock on doors, and suddenly the story people built around themselves stops working. What happened at that wedding wasn't revenge. It was accountability. Two people believed they could build a perfect life on stolen money and deception. They were wrong. And the system corrected the mistake. When our car stopped at the base entrance, the guard saluted General Sterling and waved us through. The barrier lifted slowly. I watched it rise and thought about something else. Walking away from that ballroom didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Because the real victory wasn't watching them get arrested. The real victory was understanding something much more important. I didn't need their approval anymore. Before we move on, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the quiet person in a room full of people who thought they understood you? The one they underestimated, the one they dismissed, and later realized they were completely wrong about? If that's happened to you, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. The strange thing about that wedding is that people still talk about it. Not the flowers, not the music, not the expensive venue. What people remember is the moment everything stopped. The moment when the perfect story fell apart in front of 300 witnesses. But the real story isn't about the arrest. It's about what happens after moments like that. Because a lot of people watching this probably recognize something familiar in the beginning of that story. Being the quiet one in the family, the one people underestimate, the one people assume won't go far. That role exists in a lot of families. Sometimes it's the younger sibling. Sometimes it's the one who chose a different career. Sometimes it's simply the person who doesn't fit the image everyone else wants to show the world. If that's you, there are a few things I want to say. Not as a lecture, just as someone who learned these lessons the long way. The first rule is simple. Stop trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided who you are. Some people don't misunderstand you. They choose not to understand you. It's easier for them to keep their story simple. In our family story, Brooke was the successful one. I was the awkward one with the boring job. If I had spent years arguing about that narrative, nothing would have changed. Because the problem wasn't evidence. The problem was expectation. People see what they expect to see. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stop fighting their expectations and focus on building your own life instead. The second rule is something practical. Financial independence changes everything. When my father called that morning asking for $10,000, he assumed I would say yes. Not because he believed I wanted to help, because he believed I had no reason to refuse. But independence gives you a powerful word. No. If you depend on someone financially, that word becomes much harder to say. That's why building your own stability matters so much. Not for status, not for luxury, for freedom. The freedom to make decisions without asking permission. The freedom to walk away from situations that don't respect you. The third rule is something people forget in the age of social media. Don't measure your life against someone else's timeline. From the outside, Brooke looks successful. Expensive wedding, perfect photos, hundreds of people celebrating her big day. If you only saw the pictures online, you would think she had everything figured out. But appearances are easy to manufacture. Reality takes longer to reveal itself. Success built on shortcuts eventually runs out of road. Success built on real work usually moves slower, but it lasts longer. The fourth rule is about emotional control. A lot of people will try to provoke you. They insult you, mock you, push you until you react. Because the moment you lose control, they gain it. When Brooke threw that napkin at me during the party, she expected a scene. She expected an argument. If I had given her that reaction, the entire night would have played out differently. Calm isn't weakness. Calm is leverage. It gives you time to think. It gives you space to observe. And sometimes it gives you the chance to notice details that other people miss. Like a network address flashing on a phone screen. The fifth rule might be the hardest one. You are allowed to redefine family. A lot of people grow up believing that blood relationships must always come first. But real family is built on something stronger than genetics. Respect, trust, honesty. If those things don't exist, the relationship becomes something else. Obligation, pressure, expectation, and eventually resentment. Sometimes the healthiest decision you can make is to step back and build relationships with people who actually value you. Friends, mentors, colleagues, people who judge you by your actions instead of your role in a family story. In my case, one of those people was General Sterling. He didn't treat me like the quiet kid in the corner. He treated me like a professional. And that difference matters. Respect changes how people see themselves. Now here's the part people usually ask about. Do I regret what happened? The honest answer is no. Not because I wanted to see my sister arrested, but because the truth eventually deserves to surface. If someone builds their life on deception, the collapse is already built into the foundation. All I did was open the door. The system handled the rest. And sometimes that's the most important lesson of all. You don't need to destroy people who wronged you. You just need to step out of the way when their choices catch up with them. Before we end this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been treated like the least successful person in your family? The one people underestimated? The one they expected the least from? And if that happened, how did you handle it? Did you try to prove them wrong? Or did you simply build your life somewhere else? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, quiet strength, and people finally facing the consequences of their choices, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.